Thank you, Shuja, and thanks everyone for the presence of all of you esteemed participants today. I am delighted that I have this opportunity. In the interest of time, I guess I'm going to just share a brief analysis of my book, and again, the name of the book is Prosperity for All Nations. So we'll focus on what causes poverty and how prosperity for a nation can be achieved. I've spent about 6, 7 years researching this topic, and then at the end I have put this book together. At the end, I guess again, at the end of this conversation, I'd like to learn from you and understand how we can move this message forward. So I think let me just give you the summary of the book. Just from the overall view, a lot of things I'm going to say. Again, all of you are highly qualified folks. A lot of things may sound redundant, but just to be on record, I'll share those. So the simple thing I was struggling with is when a child is born, we are all equal. So what is the reason for poverty for some nations and prosperity for others? So after my analysis, the secret of national prosperity is that, and I'll quote Professor Brian Stevens, who says, the opposite of poverty is not wealth. Again, the opposite of poverty is not wealth, it is justice. So injustice manifests as corruption. So I'm specifically focused on the abuse of official power. So I think just, to summarize, the fundamental requirement for prosperity is accountability and justice. Even in the US, some people have this misconception that it's based on freedom. It's not based on freedom. It's the freedom to do the right thing. If you do the wrong thing, you'll get punished. Now, what causes injustice? Injustice and corruption occur due to concentration of power, enabling the powerful to violate the law and get away with it. As I guess a famous person, John Acton, had said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So corruption cannot take place without having the power to do it. So what does it take, to reduce corruption and concentration of power that causes it? I mean, that's the part I think is the big question. So what I've done is I've looked at US and some other prosperous nations, and my analysis is a distributed governance structure, such as what is used in the US, with collective decision making, is the proven solution to fight concentration of power. A structure where no single official can harm an individual, thus all governing authorities should have checks imposed by the collective decision making of locally elected representatives. And I'll get into more details and explain these in this opening interlude, which may take about 8 to 10 minutes. So just to talk about justice, 3 government entities directly administer justice to a nation. Number 1 is the police to catch the criminals. The number 2 is the judiciary to decide the punishment for the wrongdoers. And third is how the money is allocated through taxes, because money is power, and for a just society, it must be distributed equitably. Now, I'm going to compare Pakistan as a third world country with the United States. So a lot of you, again, or actually most of you have some background from Pakistan, or some of you are there. If a police officer in Pakistan arrests somebody violating a rule, the most likely transaction is a bribe, because if he actually arrests or punishes somebody, they get calls from powerful officials and politicians to let the perpetrator go. If the police officer tries to enforce the law, they may get punished and be transferred to a remote location as a punishment from that influential power. And people are going to always talk about who they know and things like that when a police officer catches somebody. So what happens is that the law enforcement is not rewarded. Okay, there is nothing that benefits a police officer for enforcing the law. Instead, the police officer benefits by pleasing their superiors, by sharing the collected bribes, and thus are forced to engage in corruption. So that's what kind of determines and drives just the police's behavior, okay? Because they do not have any independent powers to enforce the law, because they are part of a vertically integrated kleptocracy, which has roots all the way, or is driven all the way to the top. On the other hand, in the US, and for those who are not familiar, I would highly recommend these things are, worth studying. Seems like you're all scholars in this particular area. Why, the US has been successful is that large metro areas are divided into small cities. Each of the local city council, and this is true in other countries, in Europe also. I think UK is governed in similar fashion. So each of the local city councils independently administer the policing and other government services. For example, where I live is the Metroplex of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and it has about a population of 3 million. It is divided up into 218 small cities, or officially they're called registered municipalities, which is kind of an official designation for a city which has their own government. And to use a more specific example, I live in Eagan, Minnesota, and it is a city of about 66,000 people right now. The police serving residents of Eagan are held accountable by the local people. Okay, the question is how? By voting to elect the mayor and the city council members who are responsible for selecting the police chief. All right. Even the mayor of the small city does not have autocratic powers. It is a part-time position that I know that individual. He has a regular job, but he does this for minimal pay to serve the community. So even him as the mayor does not have autocratic powers. He is held accountable not only by the voters, but by 4 city council members. So each city council member is representing a fourth of the citizenry of Eagan. So any decisions that have to be made, all these 5 people have to vote in majority for that 66,000 people population. And I guess just to make an observation, similar structural weaknesses permeate the judiciary in the US versus Pakistan. All right, so just a few other things to talk about, the US system. As part of the distributed structure, both the federal and state governments operate court systems. So I'm going to focus now on the judiciary in the US and in Pakistan. The state courts handle the majority of cases concerning individuals. Federal courts only decide specific cases as the constitutionality of a law or matters that may span across many or multiple states. So an individual does not have to deal with them in general. And in all states except 7, 7 small states, judges are elected directly by the people that they serve. All right. And even in the 7 states where judges are not elected, they're elected by the state representatives. The other part is, even if there is an elected judge, they do not have autocratic powers. The majority of the trials are decided by jury, which is representing a cross section of the community. So this is where, again, that distributed decision-making powers are enforced. The court structure varies by state, and again, even in the population of Minnesota of 5.6 million, there are 87 counties, and each of these court systems operate at the county level. All judges are elected for a 6-year term, and as I said, by the people that they serve. And then, this is how the local population can hold these judges accountable. I mean, they have to be qualified to be a judge, but even to become a judge, you need to be elected. Again, this concept of elected judges in third world countries, especially Pakistan, is completely absent. Right. The other thing I'm going to talk about is the collection and distribution of taxes. In the US, taxes are collected locally by the city, county, or the state to serve the local population. Federal taxes are only funds for healthcare, for social security, and again, sorry, healthcare for seniors and welfare participants, social security, defense, other welfare programs, and interest on debts are in that order. So again, the taxes are collected for the purposes where they're going to be utilized. In third world countries, either the central government collects the majority of the taxes or they control how the taxes are distributed. That is why if you see Lahore or some other cities, they have tree-lined boulevards and flyovers and beautiful lights. But outside the city, the poor people living in villages lack access to water, electricity, and roads. The governance structure and checks with localized collective decision making are implemented every level in the US and other countries. I'm just using the US as an example. Even in the schools, we have school boards which are elected members who are just volunteers. There is no pay for the school boards. Even or the parks, they have park boards to manage parks within a city. Now at the federal level, the US Constitution establishes three separate but co-equal branches of government. So this is another different thing. There are three branches, but they're all co-equal. The legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. This distributor structure again prevents one branch of the federal government from becoming too powerful and creates checks and balances on the other branches. So the bottom line is, unless structural changes are enforced, justice cannot prevail and corruption will continue. With injustice and corruption, prosperity would never materialize. The secret of prosperous countries is checks and balances, enforced a distributor structure subservient to the local population. I think that's the most important. Smaller group of people is controlling and holding accountable the services they are receiving. US has done similar or helped Germany, Japan, and South Korea through the Marshall Plan and helped these countries. And all these countries have done tremendously well. One thing which is coincidentally notable is that between Germany, Japan, and the US, the language, the culture, the religion, the race, and even the continents are different. So none of these factors matter. Somehow people have this notion that maybe it's got something to do with religion or the weather or the geography. No, it's all dependent upon accountability via localized structural checks and balances. So I think what we need to do is stop blaming the people or the leaders. They're playing by the prevailing rules. When you have a vertically integrated kleptocracy, you do not have the freedom to act in a just fashion. So just another example is, if you look at a cricket ground, I guess there are some test matches going on in the UK right now, or a soccer field, a person's skin color becomes immaterial. Everybody plays those games in identical fashion because the rules are identical. So bottom line is, folks, we have to figure out how we can change the rules of this game, and we have to adopt localized checks and balances, holding government employees accountable to serve the population. And just to give you now some background, okay, why did this happen? I mean, were we stupid, or how did this start? So the thing is, in the past, the governments represented dictators and colonizers. The goal for these people was to control the population and extract the wealth. So the colonizers left India, Pakistan, and many other countries that were colonies. But unfortunately, their system prevails. New officials moved into their luxurious estates and continue to govern and extract wealth in the same fashion. Even after getting liberated from the British, officials in most liberated counties still transfer their wealth to the West. I mean, we know all the corruption issues with some of the government officials and or prior leaders. The power of the government structure is so dominant that even when the players change, the outcome is going to remain the same. So I would like to share, this is just to conclude, that I have a dream to make this known across the globe, that we need to transform governments to be held accountable, such that we have government of the people, by the people, and for the people.